Good evening, everybody. I am Emma Spellman, the Events Manager here at the State Library of Queensland, and I'd like to welcome you all here tonight. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of this land, the Turrbal people and the Yuggera people, and pay respects to their ancestors who came before them. Today we are very proud and very happy to present the psychology of happiness as part of our Deep in the Conversation program, and first ever Deep in the Conversation program connected to the Ideas Festival of 2011, which will be held here at the State Library of Queensland from the 20th to the 22nd of May. The Deep in the Conversation program is a series of talks, debates and conversations with leading thinkers designed to share and stimulate ideas. Ideas 2011 will feature an innovative and interactive program focused around the themes of food futures, sustainability and happiness. This evening, we are pleased to welcome Hans Rang from the Positive Lane, Professor Bill von Hippel from the University of Queensland, and Carrie Sutton from the Happiness Institute to discuss and debate the psychology of happiness. Hans Rang created the Positive Lane in 2009 to provide information, tools and products for living a positive lifestyle. He has studied psychology and human behaviour and combines the techniques of leading experts on the workings of the mind with recent scientific research and his own life experiences to help people discover how living a positive lifestyle leads to improved results and the opportunity to experience a more balanced and fulfilling life. I will now hand over to Hans to introduce tonight's Deep in the Conversation event. Thank you, Hans.
Thank you, Emma. Well, good evening and welcome. I'm sure you're going to be in for an exhilarating evening. I've had the opportunity to speak with our two guests tonight, and I'm certainly excited about tonight's talks, and I think you'll find that it's going to be very exciting to listen to. I've spent a lot of time studying and practicing the notion that what we think about most, the things we focus on the most, determines the outcomes that we get in life. And it's a notion that's not new. It's been around for well over 2,500 years. The ancient Chinese practiced that notion for a long time. And I guess in more recent times, in the 1800s, teachers and writers like James Allen were talking about that. In more recent times, yet again, people like Wayne Dyer, Bob Proctor, and people you may have heard of have also suggested that that is the case. What I find particularly interesting is that over the last 10 or 15 years in particular, a lot of scientific research has produced stronger and stronger evidence that what we thought to be the case is in fact the case. And that is some of the things we're going to hear about tonight. I often hear people talk about this sort of notion of happiness as some nebulous thing that someone else has, but I don't. I often hear people also say, if only, then I would be happy. If only I could get that dream job, I'd be happy. If only that girl would ask me out, I'd be happy. If only I could get that new car. All of those things are external things, and I think fundamentally, as human beings, we can't expect to become happy based on something that happens to us. Happiness is something that happens within us. So how do we actually go about becoming more happy? What is happiness? What does it actually mean? Our first guest tonight is very well qualified to answer some of those questions. He has a distinguished career in psychology. He has a BA in psychology from Yale University. He also holds a PhD in social psychology from the University of Michigan. He has a particular research topic of interest, which is evolutionary psychology, and how that leads to some of the social consequences of aging, interestingly. And he's going to briefly touch on that as part of his talk on happiness. So to talk about happiness, what it means, what makes you happy and what doesn't, and how people often get the two confused, would you please welcome Professor Bill von Hippel.
Sorry. I'll hold really still. Thank you all very much. It's my pleasure to come talk to you all and try to explain a little bit about what some of the scientific research shows about happiness. What I'd like to do... I'm sorry. It sounds almost like one of those rock concerts that's about to really crank up. Do I have a loose lead? Okay, I'll hold really still. Okay. I'll shut this one down and just pick up his. Is that all right? Sure.
Do you want to swap? Sorry, don't undress me on stage. That's fine.
Hello, hello? Yeah, man? Beautiful. Okay, so, yes, science of happiness. What I'd like to do in order to introduce the idea is tell you guys about an event that many of you actually may have even heard about it when it happened, but I'd like to talk about what I think is going on behind this event. And so, really what I'll be doing today is talking about 3 principles of happiness that people tend not to know and that I think get in the way of their happiness. Now, I can't promise you that awareness will help, but it might. So let's start with the first principle. Here we see Joshua Bell. I'm not sure if you guys know Bell or his work, but he's one of the world's great violinists. When he was 4 years old, his parents came into his bedroom and they found him. He had taken a bunch of rubber bands and strung them onto his dresser drawer and was playing classical music by opening and closing the dresser drawers and strumming the rubber bands. I couldn't do that if you paid me $1 million, much less when I was 4 years old. And so his parents came to the not surprising conclusion, boy, maybe we should get him music lessons. And they did, and he is now one of the world's best paid violinists. So let's see if we can hear him for a moment. Or not. There we go. I don't know about you guys, but I find that just incredible. I mean, it speaks right to me. It's stunningly beautiful and really impressive at the same time. He's playing on his $3.5 million Stradivarius. So here we have it, which helps. But still, that's an extraordinary talent. And if you ask me, he's a good-looking guy to boot. So he kind of has everything going for him. So I'm not sure if you guys remember this demonstration, but a few years ago, the Washington Post decided, what if we got Joshua Bell to play in the metro, the subway stop, while people are on their way to work? And so he was happy to do it. This connection's not great. We'll give it at any rate, he said he was happy to go ahead and do that. And what they decided to do was put him in the metro. There we go. And there you see a picture of him. That's him right there. So he's playing right by the door, and he played there for about 3/4 of an hour. Now, they were a little bit worried that it would be a madhouse, and so they had police hidden in different spots, and that way, if Joshua Bell was mobbed, they could get him out of there. He's got in his hands his $3.5 million Stradivarius, and there it's, I presume, a regular old case, opened, and he's busking. And so he wants to know how much money he'll get and how many people stop. Well, for the approximately 45 minutes that he played, he was passed by about 1,000 individuals. And we know this, of course, because the whole thing was picked up on this camera. Of those 1,000 individuals, only 7 stopped to listen to him for more than about 30 seconds. Now, what's particularly, he made, I think, $32. He usually gets $1,000 a minute as a soloist, which he was obviously right there. Now, what's particularly extraordinary about this is that he's playing in the Metro in Washington, D.C., where just a little bit later in the week, he's going to be playing as the headline for the symphony. And people are going to pay a huge amount of money. They're going to sit way in the back row. They're going to have trouble parking their car. They're going to be dressed up to the hilt. And they couldn't be bothered. Those same folks just walked right by him. They could not be bothered to stop and listen to him. There was no need for the police whatsoever. It was an extraordinary example of sort of indifference. Now, the question is, why did this happen? There's been a lot of speculation about why it happened, but let me tell you the truth, okay? My opinion, actually, but let me tell you why I think it's going on. There we go. The answer to this question lies in this guy's work, Walter Mischel. Mischel is a professor of psychology at Columbia University, and he began conducting these studies almost 40 years ago now, or actually over 40 years ago. I'm getting old myself. And what he did, and I'm going to show you a brief videotape here. So, mind you, I'm stepping away from Joshua Bell for a moment, but I promise I'll come back to it. What he did is he presented children, so you see this little girl right here, with a plate full of cookies. And he told biscuits. And he told them, you can eat all these biscuits if you want, but if you wait till I come back, I'll give you twice as many. Okay? Now, there's plenty of, you can't see this particular plate very well, but trust me, there's plenty of biscuits on there. They should say, no thanks, this is enough, don't need to leave, I'll eat them now. But they don't. Kids are greedy little pigs. They want twice as many, and so they say, okay. But Mischel tells them, look, if you can't take waiting any longer, ring that bell, and then feel free to eat the cookies. Now, what Mischel did is a bit of a dirty trick, but he left the room never to return. So what do these kids do when confronted with these cookies? We'll see. You'll note that she's got her back to it right now. Here's another little girl. You can see the conflict playing out within them. And he couldn't take it anymore. Now, these videos are a lot of fun, but they're more than just fun. They're actually extraordinary. And the reason they're extraordinary is that these kids, I don't know, maybe they're 5 years old or something like this, but Mischel then tracked them down 10, 15 years later. And he found that the amount of time that they took to wait for their cookie, their biscuit, predicted their university entrance exam scores. The longer they waited to eat the cookie, the better their scores were to get into university. Now, it's an amazing effect to predict something from a child that young, to predict something that big. Even an IQ test would hardly predict how well they're going to do that far down the road. But this simple little test of how long can you wait for a cookie tells us everything we need to know about a kid in life. Now, I never tested my kids because I was too worried about what the answer would show. But what's going on here? Why does waiting for a cookie predict success in life? And why does it have to do anything to do with Joshua Bell? Well, I think the answer can be seen if we look at this next slide. If we look at our, let's go back a slide. We'll get to him in a second. If we look at our brains, there's our skull, and the brains of our nearest cousins, the chimpanzee. And what you notice is that the prominent difference here is what do they have going on above the eyebrow. Here, just the tiniest bit. Here, a humongous hunk of brain. And what does that humongous hunk of brain do that we uniquely carry around above our eyebrows? Well, what it does, what's so important for our evolutionary success on this planet, is it allows us to project ourselves into the future. What my colleague Thomas Suddendorf calls mental time travel. So we figure out what tomorrow is going to be like. We figure out how to deal with tomorrow by engaging in all sorts of mental simulations of how we might achieve our goals. This strategy is a fantastic one. It allows us, uniquely among the animal kingdom, to figure out different strategies in advance of ever trying them at all. So a chimpanzee can think about the immediate future. If it's hungry, it can grab a stick and then go fish for termites. But the moment it's done fishing for termites, it throws the stick away as if it'll never be hungry again. Humans are quite capable of imagining a state that they're not currently in and then figuring out how to solve it. And you can try 10 different ways in your mind before each one failing without any consequence before you hit on the right one and then do that. Unfortunately, the consequence of this wonderful ability is that we tend to do it all the time. We tend to spend a huge amount of our life living in the future. And that's great for solving problems, but it's not so great for happiness. And that was, in fact, the point that the Dalai Lama's made, and lots of people from Eastern meditation traditions have made. And that is that you will be a much happier person if you teach yourself to live in the moment. You're undoing what evolution's designed us to do. And of course, you still need to be able to solve your problems and live in tomorrow. But you also need to be really good at grabbing the moment when it happens to you. And I think in the case of Joshua Bell, everybody who went through that metro station hardly heard him at all. Their mind was in their day and what they've got to do tomorrow and the problems that they're confronting. And it's as if there was no sound or hardly any sound even being played. And so there's something, those people are very good at buying an expensive ticket, planning to listen to Joshua Bell, and then enjoying him when they do, because they've set aside that moment to live in the moment. But we're quite poor at doing that spontaneously, when something really good happens to come along, setting aside the future and enjoying the moment we're in. And the Dalai Lama made this point, as have many, that one of the secrets to meditation is learning to live in the moment. And when you do that, when you teach yourself to do that, there are important consequences. You won't have to have all these electrodes on your head. This is research that neuroscientist Richie Davidson has been doing with the Dalai Lama's blessing, where they take monks who have spent at least 10,000 hours meditating. Now, it turns out the good news is that you don't need that much time, although it helps. These monks have spent about 10,000 hours meditating, were then hooked up to EEG devices. And what Richie Davidson has shown is that you can measure people's happiness in their brain by the resting asymmetry, the electrical asymmetry in the front of their brain. And that happy people, when they're not doing anything, they're just sitting there, and I always get this backwards, I'm not good at yay or nay, but my recollection is they have greater left prefrontal activation than right. If I said it backwards, forgive me, but I think it's greater left than right. And what they find, what Richie Davidson found when he put monks into these EEG machines, is that their activation, their asymmetry is off chart. They're just way happier than we are, brain signature-wise. They've taught themselves something, not just about living in the moment, about loving, compassion, and all the rest, but they've taught themselves to very effectively live in the moment. And we see changes in their brain, both in its activation level and even, we think, in some of the physiology that underlies it. So our first message here is really the one I just showed you, which is living in the moment is really a key to happiness. And the good news is there's even something you can do about it. Meditating and moving on. Okay, maybe that's my hint that I'm taking too long. Let me turn to principle 2. This is Danny Kahneman, who won a professor of psychology at Princeton University, who won a Nobel Prize for his work in economics. But far more important than the silly stuff he did in economics is the stuff he's done in psychology of happiness. And what Kahneman shows us is the following. Well, let me show you the graph and I'll tell you what it tells us. Here we see the activities that people engage in and the feelings that they evoke in the moment that you're actually doing them. And so what you see, what Kahneman did is he beeps people. So he sends them a signal. What are you doing right now? How happy are you? And he measures their positive emotions and their negative emotions. And so what intimate moments with your partner, you know what I mean, produce very little negativity and a lot of positivity. That shouldn't surprise you. What's amazing to me is that next on the list is television, with a lot of positive moments and not much negativity. You then come along with doing kitchen chores or cooking, answering the phone. Note that children come only after answering the phone and just before housework. That they don't evoke much positivity. They evoke a fair bit of negativity, more than doing the laundry. But also more positivity than the laundry. And then commuting is the worst thing you can do. So that's one tidbit I'll give you today. Don't live far from work. Commuting is oops, I didn't mean to do that. It's your most miserable moment, is commuting in the car. Now, it's rather extraordinary to me that TV is such a good thing. I mean, if you ask somebody, how has your life been? You hardly ever get, I've lived a great life. I have watched a lot of television. You also hardly ever get, I've had a great life. My laundry is very clean and very folded. But you do often get, I've had a great life. I have wonderful children. They're an extraordinary source of satisfaction. But these data show us that they're not. Now, why is it that we believe that they're a source of satisfaction when in fact they're not? And the answer is that we lead two lives. We have our self in the moment and we have our self in retrospect. And our self in the moment actually is influenced by different things in retrospect. In retrospect, peaks are very important. High moments, and low moments. And so our kids give us some wonderful high moments that laundry just doesn't give us. And so we can remember back on those high moments, and retrospectively, we think our kids have been a source of amazing satisfaction, when in actuality, moment to moment, not much so. Now, it also turns out that we're very insensitive to duration, how long things last, when we think back retrospectively. But of course, in the moment, duration is terribly important. And finally, we're very sensitive to endings. How things end matter a lot in coloring our entire memory of them, which led Kahneman to really one of the most extraordinary experiments ever done. And what we have here, but is a colonoscopy device. And that's about to be inserted into somebody who probably is not looking forward to it. And what we have here is two patients, patient A and patient B. And this is the pain profile that they experienced while getting the colonoscopy. And these are people who are not properly anesthetized for health reasons, and so it's really extremely painful for them. And so you can see patient A said it was this horrible moment up to pain 8, went dropped to a 2, then went almost to a 10, and then it was over after 8 minutes. Patient B had all sorts of horrible moments, but at 10 minutes they were just warming up. Back it went again. And if you looked at this in advance, who would choose the profile? I'll take that profile. Who would choose that one? Right? Let's just get it over with. I'm not looking forward to it, but let's get it done. However, notice something very important. As that colonoscopy came to an end, it was a horrible moment. And then they reeled the sucker out of there. Whereas this person, when it came to an end, was hardly mattered at all. And so it wasn't so bad. And when Kahneman asked people later on, how bad was your colonoscopy? This guy said it was a lot worse than this guy. So Kahneman actually ran an experiment where he told the colonoscoper, leave it in about that far for a few minutes when you're done. Now, who would say, oh, just leave that sucker in there. I'll rest for a moment, right? Nobody would want it to be left in that far for a little while. But that doesn't hurt that much. And what he found is if he spent a few minutes at the end just leaving it in that far for no medical purpose, people later on said it was a much less painful experience, and they were significantly more likely to get the follow-up colonoscopy the next year. So in retrospect, we're utterly insensitive to things that matter a lot in the moment, and we're very sensitive to things that matter, but not nearly so much as we're sensitive to them. So again, the message here is what makes us happy now is not the same thing that's going to make us happy in retrospect. And we need to learn to understand that there's really two selves inside there. There's the experiencing self, and there's the self that's going to look back on it. And the things that make one of those selves happy is not exactly the same as the things that make the other happy. And let me tell you now about the final one. I've kind of lost track of time because of how we started, but I think I'm doing okay, I hope. And this is my third principle. This is research by these two guys. That's Dan Gilbert at Harvard and Tim Wilson at the University of Virginia. And Dan and Tim have done a number of experiments looking at people's beliefs about what makes us happy. So let me show you a couple of them. Here they ask people the question, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Let's go back. Here they ask the question, does marriage make you happier? And so they had people predict, how would women who are age 40 or above, how happy are they going to be when they're married? And in this particular study, they rated the percentage of time that these women are likely to spend in a bad mood. And so here are the predictions. Here's what people think, and there's the reality. So the good news is that we all spend a little less time in a bad mood than we would predict we would. But what's quite extraordinary is that people think that not being married is going to put you in a bad mood a lot, when in actual fact, if anything, being married kind of goes the other way. And I'm actually going to come back to that. So here's a prediction that getting married will make you happier that doesn't pan out. Here's another prediction. Does beautiful weather make you happier? Well, here we see this is how happy are people in California, where the weather's beautiful all the time, versus Ohio, where I used to live, and trust me, it's god-awful. And they predicted what's their overall happiness going to be. And here's the prediction, that people in California will be happier than people in Ohio. But note the good news, everyone's happier than predicted, but no difference whatsoever between California and Ohio. Now, lots of people move to California and spend a fortune on a house that's supposed to make them happier, that is going to make no difference whatsoever. Finally, probably the most important one that won't surprise you is the question is, does money make you happy? Now here what we've done is this is Kahneman's research. Same kind of question that Gilbert and Wilson are asking, of course. And he's divided people into whether they think money is essential, whether they think it's very important, somewhat important, or not important at all. And now he measures their actual happiness, that's what we have on the y-axis here. He measures their actual happiness, and he then looks at their family income. Now, it's not surprising that the bar slowly goes up when people are going from poverty. This is somebody making $500 a year, so really they're on the dole, right? And now making $5,500, $15,000, et cetera, on up. These data are from the States. And so what you see is that happiness is going up quite a bit. But you also see something else, and that is there's a massive difference between the people who say that money is essential and the people who say that money is not very important. And that difference attenuates as people get more and more wealth, but doesn't finally go away until you're earning about $300,000 a year. And so what that means is for people who money is terribly important, most of them are suffering a big decrement in happiness. And you can see that decrement, I think, if you look at, so someone who says money is very important is a 4 on the happiness scale when they make $62,500 a year. Somebody who says money is not important gets to a 4 when they're only making $25,000 a year. And so the more that money matters to you, first of all, it makes you unhappy unless you're rich. But also, the gains that you're going to get from working hard and bringing in money, they basically disappear after what's, a modest middle-class living. You need only make $40,000 a year, and you're going to gain not so much by getting the next 250 grand. You'll gain, you're receiving decreasing marginal returns. You've gone a big way from poverty to middle class, but you don't gain much when you actually become rich. And that leads to the last question. Well, if that's the case, what does make people happy? And unfortunately, the answer is very simple, but it's something that everybody forgets. And that is, well, actually, sorry, I got ahead of myself a tiny bit. My third point, which I forgot to tell you, is that our theories about what make us happy tend often to be wrong. And so we lead ourselves astray. We spend a huge amount of time trying to make money, because almost all of us do, because we think that's what's going to make us happy. Buying the new car that Hans talked about, having all those things that money can bring us. We strive for those immensely. They don't do much for us. Instead, what does do something for us is relationships. The data show very clearly that good relationships not only make people happier at the moment, but they make people chronically happier over the long term. It's the only thing that we've found so far. Entering a good, strong relationship, and it doesn't need to be a marital relationship or even a romantic one. It could be just really good friends. But entering and maintaining good relationships make people happier in the moment, and that happiness doesn't go away. Whereas the happiness of everything else, you buy your new Jag, you feel great for 3 days, and then you couldn't care less. You don't want to give it away, but it's not making you any happier than you were 3 days ago. And so really, the bottom line, and this is some wonderful work by Richie Davidson shows this, by Jan Kiko Glazier, and I wouldn't be doing my job as a professor if I didn't end with some further reading. So those of you who are interested in pursuing some of the scientific literature on this topic, this is a great book by Ed Diener, who's a big happiness researcher for the last 30 years, called Happiness, Unlocking the Mysteries of Psychological Wealth. Tim Wilson, who I showed you a moment ago, his work Strangers to Ourself, about how we don't really know what we want. And, of course, Dan Gilbert, his colleague at Harvard, who has this book that's actually, this one's a bestseller on Amazon even, Stumbling on Happiness. And all of these books are looking at the scientific literature on happiness, what makes us happy, what doesn't, and how we get them confused. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. Well, I'm sure you'll agree that was absolutely fascinating. It's interesting to see that all of the things that we think we have to go out there and do and get is in fact not what makes us happy at all. I don't know about you, but I guess most of us spend a lot of our time at work. We either work in a paid job, or we work in, or we do some other kind of work where we spend a fair bit of our time. And one of the areas of interest that I've had for a long time is, how does all this work at work? Because not only is it where we spend a lot of time, it is where we put in an enormous amount of energy. And I think being in a workplace where we feel that we are really contributing something, I think can also contribute immensely to our happiness. There was a study or some research that was done in 2001 and repeated in 2007 by the Gallup organization in the US that surveyed workplaces. And the result from the two studies that were done 6 years apart didn't vary greatly at all. And on one question, which was, to what extent are you able to use your strengths in the work that you do? only 17% of the survey participants said most of the time. Now, I find that a crying shame, because what that means, I think, is that we have an enormous amount of people sitting out there in workplaces feeling that they're not really doing the things that they're really good at. Our next guest does work in that field and has spent a lot of her career in working with staff engagement and making staff happier and more engaged in the workplace. She spent a lot of her career in education and training. She's been a guest lecturer here at the Queensland University of Technology and the South Bank Institute of Technology, and she works with organisations on staff wellbeing and staff engagement. So I'd be very interested to hear what she has to say about what makes us happy in that sense. She's going to talk about the notion of happiness. Can you please welcome Carrie Sutton?
Am I on? Ash, am I on? Cool. Okay. A lot of us, not so many, some people are naturally happy and optimistic. And I was speaking to one of the organisers, Jess, tonight, and she said, you know, I happen to be one of those blessed people that I come into work and I'm always feeling in a positive mood, and people often look at me strangely. And many of us, though, now are actually after... Can I raise hands? Who saw Making Australia Happy last year? It was on SBS. A lot more of this sort of positive psychology movement, which Bill referred to with Robert and Ed Diner, they've been researching it for the past 30 years, along with Martin Seligman, most probably for the past 10 to 15 years. It's starting to come into the mainstream culture and looking at what makes us happy. Is it selfish to want to be happy? Is it, and lots of people are asking that. I can tell you now, research again that Hans mentioned from the Gallup poll, if you're happy at work, you are much more productive. Absenteeism drops by a significant percentage, and presenteeism, which is where people show up just because they have to, but generally they often make mistakes with their work or their accidents happen, occupational workplace health and safety issues that occur when people are involved in presenteeism, just being there because they have to, is a huge issue. We lose approximately $60 million a year on presenteeism in corporate Australia at the moment. So what ultimately makes us happy? And tonight we're going to look at that. Sonia Lyubomirsky, in her book, which has a picture of a pie on the front of it, talks about pursuing happiness. And it is that, again, as Bill discussed tonight, it's not something that we really... A lot of people think, oh, if I make this much money, and again, I spoke to Jess earlier in the audience, and she sort of said, that's what people thought, oh, if I make this much money, or if I win the lotto, or if I do that. But it's what I can do with the money. It's the experiences that I have, that I can have. It's the people that I can help. What, Bill, and I'm going to say... there we go, that's the pointer. The stuff that happens, what they've found with their research is that 50% of our happiness is actually a genetic set point. So 50% set by our genes, 10% is our circumstances, and then the other 40% is stuff you make happen. And we're going to talk about those intentional activities tonight, because you can take part in those intentional activities and that can make a difference to your set point for happiness, to what you experience on a daily basis. So we call them happiness habits. What you look at on a daily basis, or things you can do that will lift your level of well-being and happiness. Sort of like brushing your teeth, except not as boring, and you don't forget that you do it. These are 10 things that science has said, whether the Diners or Martin Seligman, all of these people have been looking at it. And Hans and Bill and I were discussing before you came in, they've done some really horrible experiments to people, like shoving cold viruses up their nose, rubbing it so they have a blister and then pricking the blister to find out their level of immunity. Those sorts of things. People really wouldn't want to volunteer for them, but what it is, it actually has the scientific proof now. What was happening before, and a lot of the things we're talking about tonight, or that Hans has also spoken about and Bill's spoken about, when you look at the monks, and Mateo Ricard, which was the monk on the left, is actually going to be in Brisbane in June for Happiness and Its Causes. He's going to present. He's been studied for a significant period of time. And as Bill said, that hemisphere, it's off the charts. When he's deep in meditation, those sorts of things, and we're going to be talking about mindfulness in a minute, that impacts on his level of well-being and happiness to a huge extent. But what science is doing is it's actually catching up now. So these are 10 things that science says that will make you happy. Smile. I often call it the happiness virus when I'm working in a corporate organisation. It doesn't cost you anything. It actually, and you'll find if you smile at people, and you can tell, although she's actually doesn't have a Duchenne smile. A Duchenne smile is when, if you smile and you see the creases in the people's eyes right there, that's a Duchenne smile. And when they looked at young ladies, particularly young women, in yearbooks, they went back to their yearbooks and then went on, as Bill was explaining, the little people in the video, when you went on and saw their SAT scores, so their college entry, these people were at the end of high school. They looked at their high school yearbook, their year 12 yearbook, and went on to see how successful or happy they'd been. The people who had those wrinkles around their eyes there were a lot more happy and were generally in much more stable, happy relationships, had a higher level of well-being. So smiling is actually good for you. If you put a smile on your face, even if it's a fake smile like this lady has, what you'll find is you feel better, but it tricks your brain into thinking, oh, all right, my face is being happy, let's lift the mood. The endorphins kick in and that sort of thing. But what also happens is a cycle of reciprocity. So when you smile at somebody and they smile back, it's a positive interaction, and that lifts your level of well-being. So smiling, again, it's not a panacea for everything, and I'm not saying it will boost your level of happiness, as Bill was talking about, but it will make you a little more happy. Connect. This is one of the first and most critical, as Bill was saying, connecting with people. I can't stress how important relationships are. Quality relationships, whether they be with a spouse, whether they be with work colleagues, whether they be with children that you interact with on a daily basis. I often go in and work with teachers in workplaces, and they talk about the connection they have with their students. Connecting is vitally important. This would have to be, as Bill said, the key critical element to lifting your happiness and well-being, having those relationships, being able to come home and phone somebody if you've had a really bad day, or share the enjoyment with them. But it's taking the time to actually nurture those relationships and reach out and connect with others. Yes, we can do it through Facebook and social networking, because I work with a lot of Gen Y and they say, oh, well, we connect on Facebook, and yes, that's great. But it's also having that level of physical touch and contact, which also lifts your spirits and well-being and level of happiness. So it's taking those times. As well as with pets. Pets are really important. I haven't got pets in this list of 10 tonight as 10 takeaways, but pets actually have been shown. I've worked with organisations that have taken pets into workplaces, and they measure blood pressure when these pets come around, and the blood pressure significantly drops. When you have a pet or an animal. It doesn't drop if you've got an Alsatian and you don't like those sorts of dogs, but it helps if you enjoy the animal that's in the building. But those are the sorts of things that's connect with people, connect with living things particularly. So computers are good, but catching up for coffee, spend that time, make that phone call, talk to that person. Yep, got it. Be active. Lots of people say exercise. Ugh, really hate exercise. I'm not saying that you have to exercise. Choose a way that you want to be active. Activity, as you know, for those of you who saw Making Australia Happy, getting out there and moving your body and getting out there and doing things, out in the fresh air, being in nature, getting sunshine, those are the sorts of things that actually make the endorphins kick in and lift levels of serotonin. So choose what you want to do. I'm not saying you have to go out and run a marathon. If you want to run a marathon and that's a goal you set for yourself and you're happy to do that, excellent, let's go for it and we'll see what happens. But ultimately, it's about getting outdoors and being active. Even if you can't get outdoors, some of the colleagues that I've worked with work in cancer institute or work with cancer patients and they can't get outside for a lot of different reasons. Even on a treadmill, working at their own pace, it just gets them moving and gets them feeling like they're achieving something. And getting that exercise helps the blood flow through the body, but it does change those chemicals and increases the chemicals that make you more happy. Being active, as I said, particularly choose what's right for you. Don't feel that you have to be put upon and say, oh, well, and compare. Comparisons are not good. So if somebody says, oh, I work with a colleague, I'm doing a marathon this weekend, I'm thinking that would be my worst nightmare, but I love walking in the bush, so I go bushwalking. She doesn't like that. I could walk 30 kilometres and that wouldn't worry me on a bushwalk, but you choose to put me in a marathon situation and I'd really dislike it. So my level of happiness and well-being would go through the floor. That's the critical element. You choose what you want to do to be active. Oh, our optimism's off the screen, which is a good thing if your optimism is off the screen. Optimistic thinking. Now, I thought Bill might touch on this tonight, but looking at your explanatory style, and I'm not talking about Pollyanna optimism or always having rose-coloured glasses on. I'm looking at the issue of looking at belief, inspiration, creation, and hope. Optimism is, and how you develop optimism, if you'd like to look at, and unfortunately, unlike Bill, I don't have books at the end, but Martin Seligman's Learned Optimism, if you'd like to look at that for children or the optimistic child, I often talk to parents or work with parents and use those two texts particularly because optimism and pessimism, the way you explain things and having an optimistic explanatory style really does affect your level of happiness and well-being. If an optimistic person, say somebody comes in and the boss walks in and kicks the door shut, walks into his office, sits down, you can see that he's in a bad mood and all of a sudden he screams your name. What would you normally think? And generally, the majority of the population will think, I've done something wrong, I'm going to get fired, I'm in trouble, he didn't like what I've done. So their explanatory style is not on it's more pessimistic, and that they take it on themselves and that then it's going to last for a very long time. Whereas an optimistic explanatory style is that it's his problem and that it's going to be a temporary setback. I only have a limited amount of time, so in a really small nutshell, if you do want to read more about it, please go to Seligman's work because optimism and developing optimism is one of the best things you can do to raise your level of happiness, as well as particularly for children. At the moment, I'm working a lot out in Laidley and Gatton, the Gatton areas, and looking at how we can develop their resilience but also their optimism and hope for the future. Because of what happened in January, there is a lot of issues coming out for them, and this is one of the key things we're working on, lifting levels of optimism. Hans was talking about this a moment ago. What do you focus on? Your strengths or your weaknesses? Seligman's done a lot of work on this, as have other people. And when you look at strengths, if you're focusing on strengths, it comes down to, or for example, and the classic I use is a report card. A student comes home with a report card, has A's in these subjects, B's in these, and then a C. And which one do the parents mainly focus on? Focus on the one on the C, don't you? Come on, you've got to work harder in maths or physics, or admittedly they were my subjects that I failed in, but you've got to work harder in that. Frequently, focusing on the weaknesses doesn't increase your level of happiness. Again, I'm not saying have a Pollyanna view of the world. Address the weaknesses. But if you can find an organisation or a job where you use your strengths on a daily basis, you're going to be significantly happier. A website you can go to, there's actually 24 character strengths, although there's a whole amount of them. One that you can take for free. There's one that you can do, it's £15 in the UK, but one you can do for free. Go look at AuthenticHappiness.com if you're interested in finding out the strengths. And at AuthenticHappiness.com you can go through, it's called a VIA, and it's a questionnaire. It takes about 20 minutes online. I often print it out. If you want to do it with children, you can do it with children, there's a version, but you can't save it online, so you'd need to come back and give that amount of time. But then you can look at and say, what are my character strengths? How can I use that more in work? Because I'm not an unrealistic person that says, oh, you've got to go find a job that you can use all those strengths in immediately or quit your job to find one. It's more, for example, one of mine is generosity. So generosity and gratitude. And the way I work with that is I will write handwritten notes of thank you to people for having me present or for coming to present at my workshops. And that's how I use one of my strengths in my work. And that's what you need to tap into is say, what are my strengths? What do I feel I'm good at? Strengths are innate. And the other thing I wanted to tap into is, because I often work with corporates, is looking at people say, oh, but these are my strengths. Strengths, if you're using them, will not make you tired. If you're becoming, for example, one of my strengths, if you know anything about public speaking, most people would prefer at a funeral to be inside the coffin rather than actually giving the eulogy. One of my strengths, or I actually don't mind speaking to people, so this is what I do for a part of my living. So I've realised that and tapped into it. I get energised from this. I don't feel tired at the end of it, and that's how you'll tell if you're using a strength. If it's not a strength, because you can have learned skills and learned strengths, you will feel tired generally after the end of it. So strengths will give you energy and you'll feel a lot better after using them. Oh, wrong way. Yep. Take notice. One of Bill's, what he was saying is live in the present moment. Look at now, we were talking, I think I was speaking to Emma before about the children, and she has a 2-year-old, and she was saying 2-year-olds find their feet so fascinating. They do. 2-year-olds find anything fascinating almost. But you can see a child squatting down like this for almost an hour watching ants. Now, most adults would go, oh, ants, oh, yeah, God, do something with them. It really depends. If you're a Buddhist, no, you wouldn't do that. But if they're getting into your house, you won't like it. And at the moment with the rain, that's what they often do. And whereas children stop and have that ability to take notice. Take notice. Be curious. These are the sorts of things that will lift your level of happiness. And they're intentional activities. You can stop and take notice. Look at the sky. Look at the beautiful sunsets. Do we often make time to watch those? And it's again those moments. And that's what Bill was referring to earlier, saying with children, you don't remember all the other stuff, but you will remember moments. And it's moments like fishing. Take the time to notice, what are your child's interests? What are your partner's interests? Let's go spend time doing that. Take notice and make those times. So, because that's what you'll look back on, and that's where the level of well-being and happiness will be elevated, because you'll remember those times. This is one of the really big ones, particularly keep learning. So if you, at the moment, who does Zumba? Does anybody do Zumba in the room? Yeah, no, some, I do Zumba. Zumba is a really big craze, and a lot of people are talking about it. Go and learn something new, whether it be Spanish, whether it be, at the moment, has anybody heard of the Grass Tree Kitchen? That's out at Deagon. Lots of people are going there for cooking school or cooking lessons. Go and learn something, whether it be how to play the guitar. Whatever you want, go and take a lesson and start learning, because the way you'll use this is you have goals, and achieving your goals is one of the things that lift your level of happiness and well-being. You can, if you missed Tony Grant's show on the SBS, just Google Making Australia Happy, and you can actually go online and watch those. And they talk about how there was 8 people from Marrickville, which is a fairly depressed suburb in Sydney. And they actually didn't think that it would work. They put these people in a situation and put them through a whole variety of these intentional activities. And they kept measuring their cholesterol, their level of well-being in self-reports. They also measured their blood pressure, their weight, their levels of happiness, and their level of contentment. You can see the transformation that happens. Happiness is not easy. Being happy is not an easy thing to do. It's an intentional thing to do. It's not something that I can just wave a wand and say, oh, you're going to be happy. For some people, as I said at the beginning, it comes naturally and they find that they're really optimistic. But for others, it does take more of an intentional. What are you focusing on? What are you doing on a daily basis? And for these people, particularly in that study, they had a goal. They set themselves a goal to achieve certain things, And when they achieved them, you could see the level of happiness and well-being. You could just see it on their face, and they were just so proud of themselves for achieving it. But they kept learning, and that's actually why it's interesting. You saw some of the outtakes on that as well, and they said, that's why we came to this study. We wanted to be happier. We didn't think it would actually work because we thought we just had this set point, but we wanted to learn. So that's mindfulness. As Bill was speaking about before, and I do apologise because I'm taking a bit more time than I thought I would, living in the present moment, often you can do this you can mindfully walk, you could do it eating. One of the real ways that I talk to people about, often when I work in corporate or different places, they'll sit in front of their computer and eat. Really bad habit. If you do it, please stop. Go outside. If you can, take a break. Just move away from your workstation or move away from the place you're working so you can take a breather. And take notice. The mindfulness and the mindfulness activities are about being intentionally aware. Children, as I said, do this a lot. You can walk with a child, notice the leaves, notice the animals, notice the smell. Mindfulness, it doesn't take money. You could walk out and if I think about it, you can smell freshly cut grass. Walk out and notice those things. That's what being mindful is about. It's being present in this point in time and taking it in and soaking it into your soul or soaking it into yourself, because that will lift your level of happiness and well-being by being centered in now and enjoying and savouring. Give. We have had a huge demonstration of how this lifts people's well-being. What happened on January 14th this year, I believe it was the 14th or the 11th, was a significantly traumatic event for our city. And tonight it actually impacted on us because thank you to Ashley and the people who got this system working, we didn't know whether we were going to have PowerPoints because of what happened to this building in particular. But what we did as a community was give. We reached out and said, we want to make a difference. And this, along with connection, would have to be one of the things that lifts your level. Not as much as connection, but very much up there. Reaching out and giving another person a hand up and helping. Whether it be random acts of kindness that you do, whether it be volunteering at a charity organisation, whether it be going out and just helping a neighbour, an elderly neighbour. Sometimes, particularly in the heat, the elderly get a huge amount of... they shut themselves in. And I said to somebody the other day at one of the workplaces I was at, she said, Carrie, I didn't realise how much my elderly neighbour needed me until I went out and reached out. And she said, but I got so much more from doing that. She couldn't have paid me enough to do that now because I get so much out of that. And that level of happiness and the feeling of being needed. As humans, what do we want most of all? We want to know that we're needed and we want to know that we've made a difference. And those sorts of things actually assist us and bring our level of happiness up. So reach out and give when you can. And the perfect example has been with what happened in the aftermath of the floods, as well as what's going on in Christchurch now. Gratitude. We'll finish on this, being grateful. So it's not just about saying thank you, that's one of them, but being thankful and having a presence of gratitude and just realising how blessed we are. Frequently when I work with young people, especially Generation Y, very different if I've worked with young people in Australia, then they've gone overseas and come back, they've seen poverty. They've seen, whether they've gone to India or whether they've gone and stayed in some places in America where there is incredible poverty, which we don't actually see here. Yes, we do have poverty in Australia, and I'm not denying that. But when you go and you see our country or see a different light, you come back and you're much more grateful. And this level of gratitude, Seligman has studied it particularly. He studies a gratitude letter where you pick somebody and you actually choose to write a letter to them, specifically thanking them and saying, these are the reasons why I'm grateful and this is how you've touched my life. I haven't told you before, but I want to tell you now. And that's where, when you go and present that letter, you don't tell them about it. You just say, look, can I make a time? Come and have a coffee with you. And then you read it to them. that lifts happiness and has been shown to lift happiness, and you'll find this all on Martin's Authentic Happiness site and different things, but that it lifts happiness for at least 6 months and levels of wellbeing for at least 6 months. The effects go on. So it's not as much as connection or having strong relationships, but for one of the interventions, it lasts the most significant period of time. So that's something, and being grateful every day. So basically, I guess my message tonight with the intentional, going back to, yes, we have a 50% set point, 10% is our circumstances, and that goes with the money that Bill was talking about, but 40% is the intentional activities. So ultimately, you hold the key to your own happiness, and it's your choice to open the door. I leave you with that thought.
Thank you, Kari. I think that it's always good to be presented with some practical things that we can do in everyday life to change our circumstances, because life has become increasingly busy. Emma mentioned before that my organisation is called The Positive Lane, and it's a little bit of a play on words, because our tagline is stop living in the fast lane and start living in the positive lane. And that's because so many people live life in the fast lane. We are sort of heading at 100 miles an hour into the future, which comes back to what Bill was talking about, that we tend to spend a lot of time thinking about the future. But we also get so caught up in everyday life that we often don't make time to change the things that will make a difference. And I think that's what Kari was talking about. When we were talking on the phone the other day, you also made what I thought was an excellent point, and that is that even if you can't pick up all of these 10 things and start doing them now, pick one. Start with one. Make it a habit, and then pick the next one. Rather than say, it's too overwhelming to learn all of these new things and life gets in the way and I just haven't got the time. Just pick one and get started on that. Now, we're going to have time for some questions, so I hope that you're all ready with some of the questions. We, I believe, have some microphones that we can carry around to you so that you can ask your questions. So if I can see a show of hands from those who have questions. Yes, there's a lady. Should we start over here? It's easier with a microphone, isn't it?
I've often heard of debt being called the modern form of slavery. So I'm just wondering if there's any strong correlation between levels of debt and happiness.
I don't know the debt data particularly, but I do know that when people feel that the challenge is too great for them, be it the task they need to finish, the time they have to finish it, or in the case of debt, your ability to get out of debt, if they feel that it's not possible, it has a massive ongoing effect on happiness. Any of those kinds of things, it's even worse than commuting, actually. It's one of the things that wears down on you on a daily basis.
And health and wellbeing particularly has negative impacts on health. That, again, the data isn't there yet, but they're starting to look at that because of what's been happening with the GFC. That data those studies are starting to come through. And what they're saying, or what they're predicting to say, is that levels of debt have a significant impact, but they haven't got that data as yet. Other lady gone.
My question's just to the man sitting in the middle.
Yep.
Sorry,
You, Bill.
I forgot your full title. But I was just wondering, what made you want to study in that area when you were younger?
What made me want to study what? I'm sorry?
The psychology of happiness when you were younger.
It's a funny topic, happiness, because for the longest time we just didn't take it seriously in psychology. And so Ed Diener's been working on it forever, and he was sort of off in his corner doing that, and we all thought, well, fine, if it keeps him entertained, why not? But we didn't think that there was really much to this. And then when they started linking happiness to all these physiological responses, like Kari referred to, the natural killer cell changes online, white blood cell changes, your proclivity to get sick, your ability to heal from a wound, is when I started to really realize that happiness is one of the key mind-body links. That it's something that evolution put there in order to motivate us to do things, but it's also something that we have that has massive consequences on our life, both as we live it and as our body survives through it. And so it just started to realize it's really one of the key concepts in psychology, and one that's been very much understudied.
You just have some other hands go up yet. There's a lady down the front.
I've actually got a microphone here.
Oh, okay.
I'm a bit surprised that, first of all, thank you very much, that acceptance of other people and their frailties and their humanness hasn't been mentioned by anyone. An example being that I lost my wallet. They stole my money, but they actually took a positive statement that I carry out of my wallet. They took that as well as the money. So, and that's just accepting, and that hasn't been mentioned at all.
No. I guess for me, I picked 10 takeaways tonight that were really easy for a general audience. But yes, the acceptance and forgiveness, and there's a huge field around that, and looking at, again, it's very much like carrying a debt around or carrying a burden around that. Again, the psychological issues that go with that and looking at other people and how we relate to other people and how we accept other people or not accept other people and those sorts of things. So I guess for my part, I chose for a broad audience 10 easy things to do. Bill?
No, I would agree. Accepting others is a big part of it, and I think forgiveness is really the key. It's easy to accept others who are lovely to us. It's harder when they're nasty. And the data show very clearly that when you finally get to the point of forgiving them, it's a huge burden off your own shoulders, and people are a lot happier when they do that. And it can be very hard to do. And there's some interesting work now coming out on frontal areas of the brain and the self-control that it takes in order to forgive. It's not easy. No.
And the health ramifications that you carry around or that you have when you are carrying those sorts of feelings around versus what's going on when you forgive. There's a lady down the front.
Yes, yeah.
Hello, I've got a question. I'm just up here. Look, I'm really interested in the whole issue of sex and how it makes people happier or not. So, I mean, it's difficult to study, but how have people gone about that? Are there, approaches?
There's lots of fabulous work on sex. There was a study that just came out this week, for example, that showed that when couples are highly neurotic, which tends to be a trait that makes you unhappy and tends to make it difficult for couples to bond, if they have lots of sex, they do great. And so sex is an interesting... the data that we know of often comes from animals, but the human data seem to support it, and that is women in particular, when they orgasm, release oxytocin. And some of you probably read about the work that's coming out on oxytocin and how it increases love and bonding and things. And so humans are they're not totally unique, but they're one of the few animals that hasn't a sexual receptive period. Females are sexually receptive across the ovulatory cycle, which is an odd thing to be, because that means that 9 times out of 10 when you're having sex, nothing will come of it evolutionarily, right? There'll be no offspring. Most animals are only sexually receptive when they are fertile, and most males are not interested in unfertile females. But humans are different. Females hide their ovulation, we call it cryptic. And part of the reason that we think that they do that now is that it tricks the male into having sex with them all the time. It's a trick we men tend not to mind. But it's an interesting consequence of that is that probably the reason for this, we don't know for sure, of course, but probably the reason for this is that human infants are so difficult to raise that you really want pair-bonded parents. We know that in father-absent homes and hunter-gatherer societies where we spent most of our evolutionary history, the children were much less likely to survive. Now, of course, in today's world, in a country like Australia, that's not necessary, but still, that's the psychology that we carry around. And so sex is one of the ways that couples bond. It releases oxytocin in men and women, although women are more sensitive to it, and it causes them to fall in love with each other. And so sex not only, as you could see from Kahneman's data, which could hardly be a surprise, is a nice moment, but it also is regular sex strengthens couples' bonds dramatically, and it also makes couples happier just in general and simultaneously with each other, for both the neurochemical reasons and for the sort of obvious fact that it's enjoyable.
Down the front here.
My question relates to ageing. As we know in our society, life expectancies are increasing as a result of advances in medical science, enjoyable post-retirement lifestyles and so on. But as The Economist observed on one occasion, the meagre return one gets for this is an extended period of frailty at the end of your life. How does one maintain a happy frame of mind when one gets to that period of frailty?
Bill's been researching this. So.
Well, the data are actually very interesting on aging, and they're counterintuitive. We actually get happier and happier across our lifespan as we age, up until very close to the end. And there's actually a signature of death, I guess you could call it, which is typically is about a year, but up to 5 years before death, we start to get less happy. Now, we know that when we then go back and look at the data after somebody dies. But you actually become reliably happier throughout life quite into late adulthood. Only when you become significantly frail and have lots of health consequences and also often losing partners and friends do you see it start to tail off and go down the other way. Now, it's counterintuitive because we think of ourselves when we're young and strong, we've got everything going for us, well, we should be at our happiest. But actually, when you're young and strong and have everything going for you, like I told you, you're worried about tomorrow. And it's sort of this famous quote that youth is lost on the young. And so it's late in life when we start to appreciate things. And actually, there are even some brain changes where older adults are simply less likely to worry about the negative things in their lives. They focus more on the positive. They tend to remember it better. And older adults are much better at one of the things that Kari recommended, which is savoring. In our research, we found that even though older adults had a much less active social life than the younger adults in our sample, they appreciated the social moments that they did have a lot more than the younger adults did. So when the older adults got together with their friends, they had a great time, and they said it was really lovely, and they found it really uplifting. The younger adults said, oh, yeah, it was nice, but I got this promotion I'm working on, and all these things about tomorrow. Older adults are much better at that. They're much better at putting tomorrow aside and living in the moment that they are now. So quite counterintuitively, we tend to get happier throughout life, only up till the very end where we start to see it tail off.
Another question over there? Yep, I guess in the middle.
I wonder. I've always had in the back of my mind that having a contrast in life, or experiencing contrasts in life, lead to a more fulfilling experience of happiness. And I'm just wondering if those contrasts allow you to feel happiness in greater or lesser amounts.
Can I ask what you mean by contrasts in life? So a variety.
I guess sad moments and happy moments.
Okay.
Allowing yourself to experience those emotions, so you have a full experience. It's maybe becoming more of a statement than a question, but I guess just allowing yourself to experience those contrasts allow you to have a heightened experience of happiness potentially.
I would agree in that, as you said, you're allowing yourself to experience the full breadth of the emotions. So you experience the lows and you don't hide from those or pretend they're not happening or try and shut them off. And yes, I would suggest you can then savour the highs or the level of happiness that comes after that or for whatever period or the emotions that you're feeling. So I would think that would be a fairly healthy way to look at it, yes.
I think also one of the things that we often talk about is this balance in life where if the things that you focus on tend to be all the things that are wrong, then you will feel considerably more down. And if you only focus on the things that are right, then you're kind of fooling yourself. So if you can strike that balance of recognizing that life is a series of ups and downs and there is a balance, it's not really, really bad when something not so good happens, and nor is it that life is only ever going to be wonderful if something good happens. It's a matter of experiencing the highs and lows, but feeling the balance between them.
I just wonder, is there any research evidence to suggest that our parents, or maybe for younger members of the audience, our grandparents who grew up in the 50s and 60s with, for most people, fewer material possessions, were actually happier than we are today, surrounded with all the trappings that many of us do enjoy?
It's interesting. That question gets asked both ways. Are we less happy now with all the buzz and confusion, or are we happier now with all the cool new toys that we have? And the answer to both questions is no. There has been no change over time, despite the fact that there are huge changes in the consequences and the circumstances of our lives. So if you take an easy example, 130 years ago, Rothschild was the richest man on the planet. And he had a boil on his back, and he went into the doctor to see it, who got out the same scalpel he'd used on the 5 patients before him, never cleaned it, and cut the boil, and Rothschild dropped dead. Now, that was the best medical treatment money could buy that time, and it's now the case that the poorest 10% of Australia has greater purchasing power than the richest 10% would have had over 100 years ago in those kinds of circumstances. But that doesn't make anybody any happier. What tends to matter is what's going on at the same time. So I showed you those data that show that the richest people are a little happier than the middle, and the middle is a lot happier than the poorest. Well, those data play out everywhere you go in the same time span, but they don't play out across time. Because it seems to be that humans evolved in very hierarchical situations where being at the top of the heap got you lots of great things. Being at the bottom of the heap didn't get you those great things. So there's some really lovely data, for example, with monkeys that show that when they rise to the top of the social hierarchy, they won't self-administer cocaine. They get sufficient, in this case it was serotonin, or dopamine. They get a sufficient dopamine response without it, just by being at the top of the hierarchy. Whereas the ones who drop to the bottom self-administer a lot of cocaine because their dopamine receptors aren't so good.
I was going to say, look at Charlie Sheen at the moment, but we won't go there.
There's lots of examples in our society, but always what matters is kind of where everybody else is now. And it's a sad truth, and I think you even raised I can't remember now who raised the don't compare. But it's very hard not to do it. And I think part of the reason that we do it is that we evolved in societies where being at the top of the list got you a lot of the opportunities and resources that being at the bottom simply didn't get you.
And the comparisons, when I was speaking about the comparisons, there will always be people who are at the top of the tree who are higher than you, and there will always be people who are lower than you. So comparison is one of the worst things you can actually do for your level of happiness.
I think we've got a question down the front.
Yes. Hi, yes, hello. I'm up the back here.
Oh, okay. Here we go.
Yes, you mentioned the mainstream, and I just, I know of the Kingdom of Bhutan's embraced a gross national happiness index, but I just wondered whether there are examples, or do you foresee how this might enter Western government policy or is embedded in major institutions?
I know at the moment the UK government in 2009 actually commissioned the New Economics Foundation to undertake a study of happiness and wellbeing, and they've come up with 5 key indicators of wellbeing, and a lot of them are the same indicators from the positive psychology research of be active. So yes, at the moment the UK is looking at that and putting into government policy. Not so much. I think it's taking its time in Australia. Would you say that, Bill? Or?
I don't know of any such initiatives here. They're elsewhere in Europe as well, maybe even Denmark, although, where they're becoming quite concerned with this. The problem is that some places think they already have the answer, and they think that answer is money is happiness. And I think Australia and America fall into that camp. And so they don't really worry about all the things that sort of destroy quality of life. But eventually you get to the point where the research data becomes overwhelming. And I think we're moving in that direction. And a few countries have started to say, well, what are the key factors that influence our citizen in general and their quality of life, and what can we do about it?
I think it's interesting you mentioned Denmark. It seems to me that a lot of those countries that for a long time have been built on a mutuality that the role of government to a large extent has been to ensure that everyone looks after each other, are also the countries that have gone a little bit further as it relates to this, because there is that sense that unless we look after each other, if we are just all looking out for ourselves, then as a population we won't be as happy. Whereas if we look out for each other, which relates to the giving in particular and the relationship aspect, then we're a happier people. I think the next question is...
Hello. I just wondered, belief systems are universal across time and geographically around the world, and yet they've not got a mention here. I wonder if you know of any comparison of the effectiveness of belief systems on happiness. For instance, the picture of the saffron-robed monk versus, say, I don't know, a belief I'm going to go to hell or be reincarnated as a cockroach.
Belief is a tough one to come, but having looking at some of the data that's starting to come out, particularly of the UK and Europe, there hasn't been a significant amount of data coming out, but what it is that there is some belief that you hold some form, and a lot of people are looking at that now as spirituality, whether that be a belief in religion or whether that belief be for the person individually a belief in something greater than themselves. There's a whole wide topic of reading that goes into that, but there's not hard and fast data, no.
The one thing I can think of, it's a great question because there are huge cross-national differences in happiness that we don't understand. And some of those might come about by virtue of different belief systems. It's very possible. The only example I can think of offhand is that there's East Asian cultures tend to be very collectivistic and self-critical. What can I do to improve? It's all about self-improvement. That has costs on happiness. And so you see often national levels of happiness being a little bit lower in East Asian nations than in Western nations, where they're self-criticizing a lot and accepting criticism from others, whereas, in more Western societies, we're number one, it's all great, kind of don't worry about that mistake philosophy, which does seem to lead to differences in happiness, although the differences that are associated with that self-criticism are smaller cross-nationally than they would be within a culture. So I guess I'm really not sure.
All right, I think we've just about run out of time for questions, so apologies to those who weren't able to ask theirs. But once again, I'd like to thank Professor Bill von Hippel and Carrie Sutton for their contribution tonight. I hope you've been able to take some things away. Apart from a very interesting discussion, I hope you've been able to take with you some practical things that you can put into place and practice in your everyday life and hopefully become a little bit happier. I'd also now like just to hand back to Emma to conclude tonight.
I'd like to sincerely thank you, Hans, Bill and Kari, for providing us with insight into the psychology of happiness. What a beautiful presentation we had this evening, and I certainly will be wearing the lines around my eyes with pride from now on. We hope you enjoyed tonight's event and hope you will join us for the next Deep in the Conversation event in partnership with the Ideas Festival for 2011, which will be on Wednesday the 6th of April to discuss sustainable supper, an insight into Australia's food future. For more information about other events held here at the State Library of Queensland and the Ideas Festival program, or to provide feedback, and we are always very keen to hear feedback, please visit our website or see any of the SLQ staff afterwards, and we can point you in the right direction. Have a lovely evening, and thank you very much for joining us tonight.